First, I'd like to say thank you very much to all the comrades in the Congress for inviting me. It's a great honor to be here. And it's extremely interesting to hear all the discussions here amongst this international section of the ICC. Perhaps you can understand how relieved I am when you think that last weekend we had 4 solid days of feudal jubilation in Britain, forced on us by Murdoch's press. So to be here today is a great relief. After all that, it restores my faith in human nature. Okay. Also, just to say, I've slightly changed the title from what appears on the program, although I'm talking about all the same themes. Where you say confidence, I would say trust and solidarity in English. But I'm going to focus on Richard Dawkins, trust, as much as trust and solidarity. In English, I would say trust. Yeah. I'm going to focus on, my title has gone to the selfish gene. I want to focus on Dawkins' very provocative title. It is very provocative. But Marxists and dialecticians should not be afraid of selfish genes, because the model of selfish genes of Richard Dawkins and all his colleagues, it enables us to make a dialectical model of conflict at the level of a gene, yes, but that enables the evolution of cooperation at higher levels of organization, of multicellular organisms and of individuals, and then between individuals. Okay. And I will have the talk in 3 parts. First of all, talking about the political background of the emergence of Darwin's theory, considering Lamarck, Malthus, and Marx and Engels' own reaction to Darwinism. And then, second part, to talk about the development of understanding of cooperation in animal societies, and in the third part, reflect on what we can take from that for the understanding of primate and then human evolution. And this talk is really like a prelude to the talk that Chris gave last year on the human revolution. It's like the foundation for all that. And Chris and I have both been very impressed by how much people seem to remember and understand and have been reading about the subject that he was talking about last year. So I'll take it from there, and then we can extend the discussion about the human revolution as people want to. Okay. To talk about evolution, we have to really start with the French Revolution, making it possible, in the person of Lamarck, to begin to discuss evolution, that is, the change of one species into another species, transmutation was the way it was described. And Lamarck proposes the first recognized mechanism for evolution. He got it wrong, but we'll leave that. The important thing is he did it, and in the decades following Lamarck, evolution was strongly associated to revolutionary politics. And these decades following Lamarck's mechanisms, his proposals, were some of the most politically hot, explosive decades in the history, well, especially in England, the history of the Poor Law, the onset of the Industrial Revolution, the moving of peasantry and people off the land into the slums of the industrial cities. When Darwin eventually, in the 1830s to early 1840s, began to develop his idea, his full-scale idea of natural selection, he was simply too scared. He knew evolution was associated with, it was not respectable. It was deeply associated to revolutionary politics. He, above all, Darwin wanted to maintain respectability as a scientist, and he in fact became ill with anxiety over the fact that he understood the mechanisms of evolution, natural selection, but he didn't dare to publish all that. He could only confide in a few trusted friends who would understand what the theories were about. People like Joseph Hooker, who became the director of Kew Gardens. Joseph Hooker, he wrote to Joseph Hooker saying, I believe in transmutation, I believe in the origin in species changing into other species, but it's like confessing a murder. It was something he was scared of. Darwin brought together from all of his experience as a young man on the voyage of the Beagle through the middle of the 1830s, a time when Chartism was on the streets of Britain, a red-hot time. He was sailing around the world, visiting the Galapagos, came back on the voyage of the Beagle, and when he came back, he read Thomas Malthus. And this brought everything it clicked everything into place for his theory. This is based on who is Malthus? If Darwin's theory is rooted in the brutal economics of Thomas Malthus, this is a model of the animal world which was built on the human society of the 1820s and 30s, of the poor laws, of the workhouse, of people who couldn't find work, people who were not fit to work, being sent to the workhouse to have to survive as best they could. For the industrializing, the factory owners, the bourgeoisie of that early period of the 19th century, the early Industrial Revolution, the big problem for them was to stop the poor having too many babies. They literally, Malthus was the apologist, the legitimator of making sure that those who could not work were having children, that they would be, where there was somewhere to send them to the workhouse. So Darwin is drawing directly out of this theory, okay? Let's just see that. He did not publish his theory, okay? He gave himself nearly 20 years of research with racing pigeons, breeding pigeons, investigating barnacles, only because of Alfred Russel Wallace coming to identical conclusions that he did. Only then did he rush to print. By the time he printed The Origin of Species in 1859, the English imperialist bourgeoisie were secure in position. The Industrial Revolution was rising to its great height. The working class of England was starting to aspire to some respectability. There was now stability. Politically, it was very stable. Darwin could risk the publication. And if we look at the key points of his theory, we can see how much the Malthus is deep in there. Animals are producing too fast. They produce offspring too fast for the food supply. This is exactly what Malthus is saying about the food supply will never keep up with the amount of people breeding. Every living individual, every living organism has these tiny little differences, variation. Okay? No individual is exactly the same. So in the struggle for existence, that is the Malthusian struggle for existence, just taken into the animal kingdom, those with the favorable variations are likely to survive. They're the ones who will go forward. And then this is the bit that Darwin didn't understand, which is critical for the whole question of selfish genes. Those variations would be inherited by the next generation. But how they were inherited, he did not know. He did not understand this. But if they are inherited, they will become more frequent in that generation. And then he drew from his learning on geology and his experiences on the voyage of the Beagle of understanding geological events in the Andes, earthquakes, the rising of great mountain ranges, these long periods of geological time. Over those periods, some variations become increasingly successful and they will become more frequent in the populations. They will change those individuals into individuals of a different nature, of a different species. This is his age. Here are the key comments that Marx and Engels made concerning Darwin's theory. And this is reading from a letter sent by Marx to Engels, commenting. Marx was really laughing at Darwin's own description that he applied the Malthusian theory also to plants and animals, thinking, well, as if Malthus himself didn't bring the theory from plants and animals anyway. It's remarkable how Darwin recognizes amongst the beasts and plants his English society with its division of labor, competition, opening up of new markets, inventions out of the Malthusian struggle for existence. Okay. And then 20 years later, Engels, in the Dialectics of Nature, Darwin did not know what a bitter satire he wrote on mankind, and especially on his countrymen, when he showed free competition, the struggle for existence, which economists celebrate as the highest historical achievement, as the normal state of the animal kingdom. So high Victorian bourgeois society was demonstrating its vigor by being, as much as possible, behaving like animals, is what it means. So this is both, it's working both ways, a projection from human society onto animal society to understand animal behavior, and then a naturalization of human behavior by understanding humans in terms of animals. It's going as a sort of dialectical reflection between those. Marx and Engels were perfectly aware of this projection between human and animal societies, but they nevertheless, despite this critical reflection, they nevertheless never wavered, either of them, in their complete admiration for Darwin's materialism. They regarded Darwin as completely materialist, and that he had given the key to the understanding of animal social behaviors and all animal evolution, or the evolution of living organisms. Natural history preceding history, no question about it. But the centrality of Malthus leaves a huge problem, and the problem Darwin expressed in his other great book, The Descent of Man, some 20 years later. And this is the problem of morality. So we'll focus, I'll read this quote from The Descent of Man, and it's again there in English for the translation. Okay. Darwin is doing a thought experiment here, trying to work out a model for how can morality, trust, solidarity, how can it emerge out of natural selection? How can his process, the process that he understands, informs all of animal behavior and evolution, how can it create morality? So, the experiment. 2 tribes of primitive man living in the same country came into competition. If one tribe included, other circumstances being equal, a greater number of courageous, sympathetic, faithful members who were ready to warn each other of danger, to aid and defend each other, this tribe would, without doubt, succeed best and conquer the other. Okay? So, such social qualities, he's understanding these social qualities as being naturally selected. Okay? Such social qualities were no doubt acquired by the progenitors of man in a similar manner, namely through natural selection. Okay. Darwin is here producing what we would call today a group selection model. He is modeling. One group behaves in one way by custom, another group behaves in another way, and the 2 groups, one is selected as the best group, the group that survives as a result. But Darwin, because if we remember his theory, the focus is very profoundly on variation between individuals. So he realizes he has a big problem. He goes on in the next passage to argue with himself. I can't solve this problem, and he acknowledges it. So this is what he says. It may be asked how, within the limits of that same tribe, did large numbers of members first become endowed with these social and moral qualities? How was the standard of excellence raised? It's extremely doubtful whether the offspring of more sympathetic and benevolent parents, or of those which were the most faithful to their comrades, would be reared in greater number than the children of selfish, treacherous parents. Darwin is here expressing the problem of the free rider, the one who does not do any benefit for other people, but takes the benefit for him or herself, and by taking that benefit is able to reproduce more frequently as a result of that. So he is working it out that within the group, the selfish benefit for an individual will undermine raising the level of morality of the whole group, because the ones who survive and reproduce best will not be the most moral individuals within that group. And that's from Descent of Man, 20 years after. Okay. Darwin got buried in Westminster Abbey, and that's pretty good going for a man who was an atheist and who had made God redundant. The bishops, the great and the good, the high bourgeoisie of late Victorian society, descended on Darwin's corpse, and they did not reject his theory, but they tried to draw bourgeois veils of morality, of a kind of morality, across this theory. And this became known as Darwinism. Born from the phrase that Herbert Spencer coined, survival of the fittest. Herbert Spencer's phrase, but Darwin believed in this phrase. He thought it was a great phrase. Good. As soon as you say survival of the fittest, immediately you are thinking, fittest what? What is it that's fittest? What are we talking about? Are we talking about, because Darwin had his model with these groups, these tribes. So is it a fit tribe? Is it a fit species? Is it a fit race? Is it a fit class? Which is it? There is not much doubt what the social Darwinians thought it was. The people that they believed should be breeding the most were respectable, white, middle class, wealthy, perhaps the respectable working class, but But people who should be stopped from breeding would be those who were not healthy enough to earn their own living, couldn't find the work to support their children, all the old Malthusian ideas, okay, and that extended to an imperialist, colonialist enterprise. They don't want too many people who haven't got the right color skin to be breeding. This comes to the point in the early 20th century of the whole movement associated to eugenics, propounded in the first place by Darwin's cousin Francis Galton, promoted by such, even Bernard Shaw, H.G. Wells, these are lefties. That's not Winston Churchill. These are all people who belong with the eugenics. They follow this social Darwinism. We've got to stop people that can't support their babies properly by being respectable, by working for imperialist capitalism. They shouldn't be breeding. Okay. This, of course, becomes extremely, in the course of the 20th century, with the association of eugenics to Nazi politics and Nazi concentration camps and so forth, this becomes wholly it becomes unthinkable. So for ordinary biologists, ordinary scientists, they pushed away the question of the evolution of morality. It became too dangerous a question. Instead of that, what the biologists of the early 20th century started to do was they began to understand Mendelian genetics, they understood Darwinian's natural selection, and they started to put those things together in the Mendelian synthesis, the neo-Darwinian synthesis. But they were very much focused on the mechanisms by which genetics as the heritability, the factor of inheritance, could be integrated to Darwinian natural selection. They did not think very hard about social behavior. They focused on mechanical questions and left the social behavior out, which meant that it was nearly 100 years after the death of Darwin, after the publication of Descent of Man, almost one whole century, before people started and dared to think about social questions of social evolution. In the aftermath of the Second World War, in fact, it was led by people like J.B.S. Haldane, the leading population geneticist, evolutionary biologist, who was also a member of the Communist Party at a certain time before the Hungarian uprising. They began to think because you're dealing with genetics as a mechanism of inheritance, they started to integrate the level of the gene with natural selection. Okay. But what provoked the understandings, beginning to make models about the evolution of cooperation, was this famous book by V.C. Wynne Edwards, he's Scottish biologist. And this book was written as late as 1962, but it was the first time there was a really good formulation of the ideas of so-called group selection. And it was dialectically, it was by the theoretical formulation of group selection, thanks to that the theorists who produced selfish gene theory, leading eventually to Dawkins' selfish gene, George Williams, W.D. Hamilton, I left E.O. Wilson off there, amongst others, they realized that they had to combat group selection and demonstrate how it could not work. So I'm going to show you what the problems are with group selection, and then I'm going to show you what the selfish gene models for cooperation are, and then we'll go to primates. So Wynne Edwards' focus in animal dispersion in 1962 was to investigate. He was very much a biologist, observing very closely animal behavior, all kinds of examples. It's a long book with lots of examples of animal behavior. And he described animals as having morality, conventions, that animals agreed with each other, customary rules and laws. He was describing animals as if they were human, entirely human and moral. And this sounds to us, and it sounds to many Marxist groups that we have come across in Britain, including the SWP, for instance. It sounds, that sounds really good. Animals are moral beings. It sounds really lovely, cuddly, you know, nice. Okay. But in the course of applying this morality, let's just investigate what it is. It amounts to population regulation. So, for instance, Wynne Edwards would observe the behavior of starlings. People know those starlings, they're thrush-like birds. Starlings flocking in the evening in the roost before they go back to the roost. He termed this epideictic behavior. What he meant by that was the starlings were looking to see... Oh, starlings. You'll just have to call it in English. Epideictic is I'll explain it, what it means. The starlings are looking to look at how many of them there are. Combien? So once they've got an idea amongst themselves how many there are, and they know what the environment is like in terms of how many worms, what food is available, then the starlings come to an agreement. Right, this year, this season, we won't lay 3 eggs, we will lay just 2 eggs each in the nest, because if we lay 2 eggs each, then there'll be enough for everybody, but if we lay 3, then some of us will starve. Okay, this is effectively what it says. All right? Right. So this is very good at explaining cooperative behavior, but it is not going to help us at all in terms of explaining any kind of competition between the individuals, the members of that flock. A selfish gene theorist would say, well, wait a minute, or even Darwin himself. Even Darwin himself would say, well, suppose there is one starling in that flock who decides, I'm going to lay an extra egg. And because everybody else has limited themselves, they should be able to have enough food to have enough for 3 chicks and all the other starlings just 2. So if that carries on sufficiently, the starling which is selfish and lays the extra egg will have more hereditary in the next generation, will pass on more in the next generation. So immediately the free rider problem undermines the group selection. If I can, another funny example. There's a nice story about caribous. Wynne Edwards had this story about caribous. He observed caribous in the Canadian Arctic. People know. It's in French. They have the males have big horns. They use the horns. They have to thrash the horns in bushes to get ready to fight and to be able to mate. Okay. So Wynne Edwards thought, well, what's going on? Because he doesn't want to talk about conflict. So what is going on with these males thrashing in the bushes? Okay. What's going on is if there are no bushes, then the males can't thrash their horns. If they can't thrash their horns, they can't get an erection. If they can't get an erection, they can't mate. So when there are no bushes, the males do not fertilize the females, and there's less caribou, there are fewer caribou to eat the surroundings. Okay? The selfish gene scientists, or even Darwin himself, actually, you don't have to be a selfish gene, would say, but suppose there is one mutant male, just one male is a mutant, who doesn't need to thrash the horns to get his horns and to get an erection. So while all the other males can't find bushes, they can't get an erection, they can't mate the females, the one male who can do it, because he's a mutant, he just has all the females. So it's in the next generation. It's no good. Yeah, it's no good at all. All right. This sounds funny at that level. It sounds ridiculous. And as soon as you think it through, the point about Wynne Edwards is that he made the selfish gene scientists think things through, how to work out the models. But actually it has a sinister side to it, because group selection is effectively social Darwinism. It's nothing else but that. The main philosophy of Wynne Edwards' morality amongst animals, the morality amongst animals was the weak go to the wall so that the strong ones survive and carry on the species. So weaker animals, in times of food shortage, weaker animals should agree to starve and let the strong animals have the food. That was the moral thing to do. And in particular, the most famous case study, which really destroyed the group selection idea, was the problem of infanticide amongst primates. According to the Wynne Edwards group selection position, and it was a position that he took from primates and other animals straight onto human beings as well. He looked at human infanticide as well. He asserted that infanticide was a matter of population regulation, making sure that there were not too many babies for the food supply, and the male, the dominant males, were doing it for the good of the species. Sarah Hrdy, the great Sarah Hrdy, Darwinian feminist, one of the leading Darwinian primatologists in the world today, went to the field to study langur monkeys and wrote this book of her experiences, of her observations, where she observed cases. So what we're seeing with these pictures, we see those two langur monkeys that on the left hand. They're the little temple monkeys, the monkeys who live in the temples, the Hahnemann langurs. They are two females, and they're desperately trying to stop a male who has come into the troop and has taken the baby of one of them. And probably the other female is a relative of the first female, probably maybe her mother or sister. And Sarah Hrdy is watching this, and she is seeing that most certainly the females do not agree with what the male is doing at all. It's quite clear that there is a huge amount of conflict, and it is sexual conflict going on. The other picture is showing us the bachelor langurs. Langur monkeys can live in harems. Often they live in a harem with one male and a large number of females. The females will be close relatives of each other. The male will be one outsider male. The other males live in these bachelor bands, and they're on the lookout the whole time for a chance to become a harem male, if they can. So they come and invade into the groups if they get a chance. And then a new male may take over. Hrdy observed that the time when infanticide happened always was correlating to this takeover. And the one who was doing the killing of infants or attacking of infants was a new male. She argued, in line with the selfish gene scientists, and we'll talk more about selfish gene, what does that mean? She argued, in line with the selfish gene scientists, the new male wants to start breeding with females as quickly as possible. Any female who has a baby, she's breastfeeding, that stops her from being fertile. That new male has no interest in waiting to be able to mate that female. He goes and attacks the offspring, stops her from breastfeeding when the offspring is dead, and then within a very short time she comes back to cycle, and she will mate the very male who killed her offspring. That's what she will do. She doesn't have much choice about it. He's the one that's there. She wants to get on with breeding again, so that's what she does. So that is a selfish gene interpretation looking at the conflicting strategies of the male and the female there. Okay, what does that mean, selfish gene? Many social scientists, many scientists on the left, many anthropologists, many Marxists have been shocked by the notion, the selfish gene. They say, if you think that genes are selfish, doesn't that mean you think people are selfish? But what is a gene? It's a stretch of DNA. It's a sequence of molecules. Genes do not have moral characters. They aren't thinking about how to be mean and nasty and trick people or whatever. Genes, all they do, DNA, all it does is it replicates itself. It just replicates itself. That is what genes do. Okay? To be selfish for a gene is just to do what DNA does. Copy yourself, itself. Copy the sequence. If the gene does not copy the sequence faithfully, it is no longer a gene. In terms of evolution, it's gone. By definition, all the genes that have copied us into the world today, they are successful, selfish genes. They must be. They replicated themselves, by definition. Okay. But now we have the possibility, if we accept what genes do is they copy themselves. Okay, there's some mutations. They arise and they change things, but basically genes should copy themselves. They copy themselves. That's selfish, but it enables us to understand cooperation at higher levels of organization between the individuals, the animals that are the phenotypes in the world, the animals that are in the world which carry the genes that pass down their traits. All right, I'm just going to go very quickly through the most basic explanations of cooperation on the basis of selfish gene theory. And this looks complicated, but it's very intuitively very, very simple. If you are related to somebody, a close relative, then there is a high probability that if I have a gene in my body, any particular sequence of DNA, that will also be in the body of, say, my sister, or my brother, or my mother, or my child. Yep. In that situation, a selfish gene will be selecting me to behave, will be leading me to behave in a way that is beneficial and even possibly altruistic. In other words, I may be taking on cost, I may be suffering a cost to help my relative. What Bill Hamilton did with this inequality, this condition, was to express exactly the situation. When would I be altruistic or not? Yep. So I could be altruistic if the R is the probability that the gene is in my relative. If that's my sister, my full sister, it would be a half. The probability is a half. And therefore, I will suffer the cost for my sister if she ends up with a benefit of twice as much as whatever cost I suffered. She has twice as much benefit. It's worth it. It's worth it to me. It's worth it to my selfish genes. JBS Haldane expressed it the most simply. He said, he said, JBS Haldane, would jump into the water to save the lives of 2 of my brothers or 8 of my cousins. Because 2 brothers, half of my genes equals like 100% of my genes. 8 of my cousins, each cousin is like has an 8th probability of being. It's a very easy theory to understand, really. And we see many examples of animals acting towards their likely probable relatives in ways that are altruistic. And if we begin cooperation on a basis of relatedness, then we will have pockets in the population where animals who are operating on the likelihood of relatedness, they will be altruistic to each other on a more general basis, perhaps. And this can lead to a situation to evolve the next model for cooperation in selfish gene world, Darwinian world. This is a model called Prisoner's Dilemma. And it is called that because there are there's one party and another party, and they have to decide whether or not to cooperate. If they cooperate, there will be a mutual benefit for cooperation, which is expressed over there. Both cooperate, it's over there, on the top left hand. If they defect, if both of them, if they fail to cooperate, they get a sort of a minor punishment. They don't gain anything very much. The trouble is that suppose one party tricks the other party, one party cooperates and the other one does not cooperate. What happens then is the square underneath and the square on this side, a big down for one of them, a big prize for the other one. Okay. The trouble is with this situation, is that if you only play the game one time, the best thing to do is always defect, is be in this corner, and you can't get cooperation off the ground. That's the best way to play the game. If you think about it, it's always going to be the best way to play the game, because suppose you cooperate, the other guy might defect and you lose badly. Suppose you defect and the other guy cooperates, you'll win a lot. So the best thing for you to do is always to defect. It's going to be the best result for you whichever way. The thing changes when the game is played again and again and again. So-called iterated prisoner's dilemma. Okay. But you must not, as long as you do not know when the game stops, as long as the game keeps on getting played and you don't know when's the last time it's going to get played, then it becomes a good plan for the selfish genes to do cooperate if the other party cooperates. Copy what the other one does. And this is the strategy known as tit for tat. It's also, I'll scratch my back if you scratch, I'll scratch your back if you scratch mine. Yeah, it's like that. But as soon as the other party does something wrong, they defect, you defect, and you punish them somehow. You need to have punishment in this model. There have been animal social examples of this model seeming to operate. There are examples amongst such animals as vampire bats, who are very good reciprocal donators of blood to each other. If one of them misses a meal, another vampire bat will donate blood. Oh, vampire bats, chauve-souris, chauve-souris, the vampire, yay. Sorry. Vampire bats, les chauves-souris de vampire, they give one of the few examples amongst animals of this reciprocity, where a bat who has been able to feed, has full of blood, will donate blood to another bat, not their relative, not a relative, somebody who's living in their roost, and will enable that other bat to survive, because a bat who has only 3 days without food will die. It works with vampire bats because the punishment, if they do not reciprocate and they get excluded from the system, is death. It's a high punishment. But a problem with this reciprocity is the punishment is usually very costly. If you think about an example. If you see somebody in the street throwing litter on the floor, do you go to say to them, you shouldn't do that, you should put the litter in the bin? It's got a cost. It's a cost to you. You would be doing an altruistic act for the whole society, in fact, not just to, by punishing that person, by saying you should do this. But it's costly for you to do it. So most of the time, if you see somebody throw litter papers, you don't bother. You leave it up to the municipal, the Conseil de Paris to fine people, but they don't bother either, do they? No. So this is the other model, and this model has become very important. And we are seeing some very moral birds here. These birds have a great deal of morality, great deal of moral conduct and character, these birds. These birds are called babblers. There are many species of babblers living in the deserts in the Middle East, in India, different places. Babblers, the male babblers, compete to be cooperative. And the females are judging their behavior, and according to the prestige that these birds gain, the females are more likely to mate with them. And the ways that the babblers compete, you see these guys on the fence post, you think they're being cooperative, you think they're cuddling up to each other. No, the bird on top, he's the top bird. He's the alpha, and the other birds want to push him off. But he is showing how good he is. He's showing his quality, is the way that Zahavi puts it. He's showing his quality by guarding. He's watching out. He's a sentinel, and this is costly to him. It's hard for him to do that because by being on that post, he's losing time to feed. He is risking an eagle coming to take him. He's being very brave, yay. But, and all the other babblers and the females, they're watching. That's a good male. Okay, mate with him. The other things that babblers do is if there is a snake, then the bravest, the top male will go forward. The second male will go forward. And the top male will go and sweep him away and say, no, I'm going to do that snake. So the male that can get closest to the snake is the top male. And he will put down the second male and push him out of the way. And feeding as well, this is a different species, but the same principle. The males cooperate to feed nestlings, and the nestlings are in a collective nest. The nest is not just necessarily two parents, it's all of them helping at the nest. And to feed an offspring gives you prestige. And so the males even express the rank, so the top male will try to stuff food in the mouth of the second male. The second male will stuff food in the mouth of the third male. To feed somebody is to express superiority, that you dominate them. So these birds, the females have got the males to be doing all these useful things, guarding, attacking snakes, feeding offspring, by sexual selection. They are getting the males to compete for the chance of mating by doing these things. Humans in evolution, humans as they became hunters and gatherers, I suspect that female female ancestors, our female ancestors, got human hunter-gatherers, men, to do such useful things in costly competition in just the same kind of way. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. The last part, we'll just look at primates and humans. I've run very long. I'm sorry about that. Oh, well, that's still damselflies. Never mind. Selfish gene theory focuses, unlike social Darwinism has a focus on race, group, class. Selfish gene theory focuses very much on the sexes, the two sexes, males and females. With mammals, with our ancestors, I'm talking about males and females. We heard a wonderful story about some plants which have males, females, and hermaphrodites at lunchtime. So there are other sexes, but for our ancestors, it's males and females. Fundamentally, males and females among mammals and primates reproduce by different strategies. And these strategies are in conflict with each other. And out of this conflict occurs evolutionary change. This has been expressed by Patti Gawati, a very close comrade of Sarahodes, as sexual dialectics. It's also known as sexual conflict theory and antagonistic co-evolution, where the selection pressures on each sex impact on the other sex of their strategies. For females, females produce expensive eggs. And for mammals, females have to breastfeed, females have to be pregnant. It's a very expensive process. Females need resources. Males, sperm, lots of sperm, any male amongst mammals, or lots of sperm. They want to find fertile females. This is the default for all mammals. Yeah. Males need to find females, as many as possible. Females need to find resources. Okay. There is, what Gawati means by dialectics is there is a to and fro in evolution between males want to control as many females as possible. Females want to keep choice. They want to choose which is the best male to be the father of my baby. And there is a constant tug of war between the sexes about this. And this can create a process of evolutionary change. Okay. In some animals, like these insects, the damselflies here, males they force they effectively like rape a female, hold her there, prevent any other male from coming to contact. They just, until she's fertilized, they just coercion. Okay. Females will evolve in ways that resist that because they want to be able to choose. Is this male good enough, or do I want a better quality male? They want to have some choice, because this is a huge investment for the female. Then males may evolve other ways of trying to control females. And one of the ways they can control females is through controlling resources, because females want the resources. We can start thinking about how some of this might apply in the case of human evolution. And then if females will evolve strategies counter to that by resisting the ways that males control resources. And they will break free again to be able to choose. If you are thinking that this antagonism between the sexes in natural history, in evolutionary biology, has an analogy with antagonism between the leisured class, the capitalist class, and the working class, labor, the ones who reproduce wealth, then I would agree with that. Okay? The males, for amongst mammals, there are exceptions, But amongst mammals, males are the leisured sex, and they exploit the energy of females in reproducing offspring, massively so. Okay. A bit about. If we take those principles, especially to primates, so primates are closest relatives, and they are most similar to us in terms of how long they live, their intelligence, their sociability, their social organization and complexity, their life history, that they have long lives, that they can only bear one offspring, mostly one offspring at a time, and that is very costly for them. It is, well, this is a Royal Society paper which expresses the general principle in primate social evolution. It is females that are the basis of all social organization in primate groups. And it is through the changes that occur amongst females that change in social organization occurs. And this is driven by female requirements for resources, fundamentally. So here again, we've got this same species, the Hanuman langurs, the monkeys on the top. And these are groups, these are alliances of females. They're female coalitions. They're related females. This is kin-selected related females. On the one side is one group, on the other side is another alliance, and they are fighting over territory. You got? In the case of the langurs, these are related females. But when we look at the example of the apes underneath, these are bonobos, the other species of chimpanzee. Again, it is a matter of females being at the core of the social organization. But in this case, the females are not even related to each other. They create very strong bonds through sexual activity, so-called GG rubbing. They have sex with each other, as well as having sex with males, and everybody has sex with each other amongst bonobos. In bonobos, unlike chimpanzees, females are able, they have enough resources in their environment to stay close to each other. And because they can stay close to each other, they have these strong alliances. And this is a different story from amongst chimpanzees. We'll talk about them in just a minute. The basic model of primate evolution is females have the requirement for resources. They must solve the requirement for resources. Materially, they place themselves where they can get the resources they need for themselves and their babies. That's if you like it in Marxist terms, it's like an infrastructure. It's the basic economic infrastructure. Females must find the food they need for themselves and their babies. The males see where the females are, and they work out how to control and get access to as many females as they possibly can. So it's like a superstructure of the males on top of the way the females have organized themselves. And that is what will create. So it's the female basis. If that changes because the female requirements have changed, because an environment has changed, then the females change and the males change in response to the females. This is why females are driving it. This is general for mammals, for animals anyway, but it's primates especially. Why is it primates especially? Because the more that you need a long-term energetic investment in offspring, the more that females have these requirements of resources, the more they are fundamental in the social organization. Okay. So I'll try very quickly to say something about we are primates. We are amongst the great apes, the great African apes. What really is the difference between us and the other great apes? So I'd like to say something about the work of of Sarah Hrdy. More recently, this is the same Sarah Hrdy who was observing the Langer infanticide all that time ago. And her most recent book, and if you did nothing else after this except to find her book, I'm sure it will be translated, read her book. It's one of the great works on human evolution. I want to talk about her work and a bit about Tomasello, but she speaks about Tomasello in her book a lot. How did we had ancestors, these are common chimpanzees at the top. The other species of chimpanzee is very dark over this side. Yep. From being chimpanzees, we've ended up in our evolution, the most of our evolution has been spent as hunter-gatherers. So these are forest hunter-gatherers from Congo-Brazzaville here. For 99% of our evolutionary history, we have been, as Homo sapiens, we have been hunter-gatherers. Okay. And there is a radical difference in the ways that these societies are organized. Sarah Hrdy advances the idea that what really changed for us in our ancestors, in the early ancestry of genus Homo, Homo erectus, nearly 2 million years ago, is that we became cooperative breeders. We started to share the burden of childcare. Now that sounds obvious, but for chimpanzees, for a female chimpanzee, it isn't possible. She has no help at all in raising her offspring. What's more, a female chimpanzee, she will hold on to her offspring and she will not let it go to another individual. Or hardly ever is it possible for a female chimpanzee to do that. The reason it isn't is because she will live in quite an isolated way. She has to be isolated because she needs resources to feed herself and her offspring. And because of her environment, she cannot gather very much with other females. The other females are not her relatives. She will not necessarily trust the other females at all. What Sarah Hrdy says is that we in our evolution, we had all the sophisticated intelligence, social intelligence and cognitive abilities of the great apes, like chimpanzee ancestors. But in addition to that, we were able to count on female relatives. We had female relatives close by, and this meant that a mother would be able to get another female to babysit, to take over the care of the offspring. Monkeys who have female relatives, they quite often babysit for each other. It's quite common with monkeys. The Langer monkeys do it. But amongst the great apes, no gorilla, no chimpanzee, no bonobo, not even the bonobos, and they have strong alliances of females, but they're not relatives. They don't trust another female to take their offspring, their very precious offspring. Think about the hunter-gatherers, a camp. If you went into any hunter-gatherer camp, if a woman is holding a baby, you can't be sure that that's the mother of the baby. It is just normal for women to be holding each other's babies. They give the baby to each other, a woman will go away to do some work, come back to the camp, take the baby, they will breastfeed each other's babies. It's a normal practice. It's like an instinct. Just think of your own experience. It's like an instinct that if you have a baby there in the room, you pass the baby round. It's like a normal thing to do. Now what Sarah Hrdy's arguing is that in the court, for starters, it connects to what is known as the grandmother hypothesis. Who would be the first female that you would trust with your own baby? The female you would trust with your own baby, if you were a mother, your own mother. No one else fits the bill from an inclusive fitness point of view. No one else. So the first place to start is with the grandmother. And this can explain the evolution of human life history in terms of menopause, in terms of the long lifespan for a woman after she has stopped reproducing. Then Sarah Hrdy says, okay, by setting up this situation of there's a mother and she hands her baby to her mother, this selects for a new type of psychological capacity, psychological disposition, what Michael Tomasello calls intersubjectivity, or simply the ability to share attention. So a mother's handing over her baby. She is going to be looking at her mother to judge her mother's intentions towards that child. The baby is going to be looking at mum and then looking to grandma. They will be following each other's eyes, looking into each other's eyes, trying to understand to each other's intentions. The baby wants to make sure mummy doesn't go far and wants to make sure the grandmother is going to look after it. The mother is wanting to make sure grandma is being kind, and grandma is, they're all interlinked to each other, into a triadic, something very different, which never happens with great apes. Okay. Part of this argument of Michael Tomasello's is linked to what's become known as the cooperative I hypothesis. If you look at the difference, so there's a whole selection of our immediate relatives, of orangutans and gorillas and chimpanzees and bonobos. They all have round, dark eyes. And it's like the difference with the human eye is absolutely clear, very, very clear. These young primates here, already, even when they're young, it's like they're wearing sunglasses. Why are they wearing sunglasses? It's like a mafia don does not want anybody to read his thoughts. These young apes, they are not allowing, they're not giving anything away. Our eyes are designed to show what we're interested in to the people we're engaged with. It's absolutely clear because of the shape of the eye and because of the white background. And Michael Tomasello's arguments about intersubjectivity and what is the difference between chimpanzees and their ancestors, humans, children, and their ancestors, is that our ancestors, became willing to allow others to read our thoughts, to know what we're interested in, to engage and share attention to the same objects. We have intention to communicate our thoughts and to show what we're interested in. Now, it's a critical question of human evolution. At what point did the cooperative I actually begin to emerge? Because that point it's an evolutionary, but it's the beginning of a revolutionary tipping point in cooperation. Because, and going along with that cooperation and this ability to read each other's minds, must be a level of egalitarianism that is not known amongst apes. Apes are status-driven, they're dominance organized. A dominant ape will be trying to read the mind of a subordinate ape, but the subordinate, a younger ape, does not want the dominant to know what it's thinking necessarily. It may not be in their interest at all. So this is one of the mechanisms that shows beyond dispute that we have a quite different evolutionary history as a prelude to the kind of revolutionary actions that Chris was talking about in his talk last year. My guess, and it's possible that this could be tested, my guess is that these eyes, these cooperative eyes, began to be selected for amongst Homo erectus nearly 2 million years ago at the same time as the cooperative breeding of women with their mothers. And that cooperative breeding began to extend also to males, to bring males into the system of economics as provisioners. The females would have been selecting males who were most cooperative through helping with provisioning, but females would have stayed with their mothers and relatives to get as maximum support for their offspring as they could, because in selfish gene terms, their mothers are reliable. Their female relatives are reliable. Males can come and go, but their female relatives are solid. For this reason, and I'll just finish with this and we can then talk, for this reason, the comrade who was saying Engels was wrong and Backhofen was wrong, I am not so sure about that. And today, the grandmother hypothesis and the work by Sarah Hrdy is taking us back to a validation in a different form of Engels' original ideas. And I would just say one more thing about Engels, because if you go and read Origins of the Family, Private Property and the State, and you read what he says about primates, even though he did not have any good information about primates, he got one thing absolutely right. He said that human society was a complete revolutionary discontinuity from primate society, and it was all about the mutual tolerance of males. And in the new modern models by Sarah Hrdy and Kristen Hawkes of the grandmother hypothesis, and then the models that Chris and I with the sex strike hypothesis have developed as well, females' relatives are the core of the society. Males come and join those female relatives and will live together, and there may even be multiple mating. It's known in anthropology as partible paternity, so that more than one male may mate and be possible father of offspring. So this is a kind of basis for what Engels from Morgan was understanding as group marriage. And we should not, comrades, we should not give up on Engels.